Welcome. I'm here with Taniya Hussain, and this is a living library conversation. So those of you who have been watching this, watching this series of conversations, know that if you are a member of the Time Bank, the Karmic Margin Call Project Time Bank, please put in for credit. You get time credit for watching this conversation and all of the living library conversations. So please make sure that you enter that in as a service you are providing under presentations, workshops, and classes. So I'm going to be talking to Taniya today. So remember, this is we go for an hour, and what we're doing is we're role modeling appreciation conversations, which is really we want to get away from the culture of debate and competition, and we're really just trying to create a space where conversation culture can emerge. So Tanya and I have been communicating now for I would say over a year at this time. But Tanya, please just introduce yourself and please just tell us a little bit about you, about your background, and about what are you coming to today's conversation with today? So the floor is yours.
So my background is something I'm very proud of actually. So my background is as a social worker. I've been a social worker for over the 34 years. I qualified at the age of 22 back in 1991, and I've been working in London, UK, since then as a social worker on the ground with children and young people and their parents and carers. And for the last 28 years, it's actually been 28 years, it was 10th of February, it's 28 years, I've been working with children and young people and their parents and carers, and the children and young people are in the criminal justice system. So I've I brand myself, and some people say I am the Muslim alchemist because I come from a Muslim background. I'm very proud of being Muslim, but I feel like all social workers are alchemists, alchemy being taking, transforming the base metals into gold, so transforming the crap and the shit into gold. And I think sometimes we are the modern day alchemists, really
Yes.
transforming things out of nothing. We have very few like resources, and we are all alchemists. We all have that ability to transform. Unfortunately, a lot of us have forgotten that we have that innate ability, to heal ourselves and to actually transform the crap into gold. So yeah, that's my background.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tanya. What's really resonating for me after the introduction is I know you through mostly business connections and that kind of an atmosphere, that kind of an arena. But what I'm hearing is the work that you're doing with kids and with young people as a social worker. So that's something that is really is really alive for me at the moment as well too, as I'm kind of reflecting on my journey and really just really appreciating my time with working with my kids, and I have a background in teaching kids and teens as well too, so that's really alive for me. So you are wearing your pink hat today, so let's talk about what is alive for you at this moment. So yeah, just what is alive for you? Tell me about the pink movement that we were discussing online a couple of days ago. Just whatever's
Oh,
alive for you.
so it's kind of synchronistic, really, that we're doing this on Valentine's Day, which
Yeah.
is all about love. And I really believe in this isn't about romantic love, although that's lovely. This is about love for humanity. So the pink
Mhm.
movement is all about loving humans beyond faith, beyond skin color, beyond politics, beyond um, sexuality, sexual orientation, gender, just loving each other for being human. And although that sounds in some ways a radical idea, it's not. It's a very old idea. It's a very human idea. It's a very human movement. But I feel like we really need to really embrace that with the divisiveness that we kind of are feeling, because although we're living in a very, technology has really connected us, I feel like a lot of us actually feel very disconnected.
Yes.
Although we are very, a very, we're probably the most connected generation, like connecting to each other, connecting, like what we're doing just now. You're, across an ocean. You're, you
Mhm.
know, but yet that that disconnection within ourselves and to each other and to our local communities and to, humanity is I think the most, maybe probably, that we've ever felt.
Mhm. Yes. What I'm hearing and what really resonates with me as well too is this love and being able to, to connect in spite of or in the environment of this divisiveness or what I think of as this polarization. Um, so yeah, yeah. What do you sense or what do you feel is underneath these these relationships where we feel like we are disconnected or we feel like there is a divisiveness or there is there is that disconnect. If you had to put it into words, Tanya, what do you feel would be underneath the surface?
Ooh. I'm just gonna like say what comes up, right,
Go
without
for it.
having to think with my head.
That's
Let's see,
that's what we're going for. That's what we're going for.
rather than like kind of like think it out.
Yeah.
And so I'm very much, for those that know human design, and if you don't, doesn't matter. If but I very much kind of am from my gut and kind of just go with my gut instinct. So I feel we're living in a time, and for those of you that are very familiar with George Orwell, you will really relate to this. We're living in a time that you you become a very comfortable in your echo chamber, in your bubble, in your social bubble, in and I maybe, I don't know how it has happened. I've always actually, to use a very coaching cliche, always gone out of my comfort zone
Yeah.
from a very young age. So I was the first in my family to become a social worker. I
Mhm.
was the first from a Pakistani background. I was born in Pakistan, but I came here when I was one. So I've most apart from 1 year of my life, I've lived in London. But
London.
I kind of was one of the first, as a young Pakistani woman to live, in university accommodation, live outside of London. I'm kind of like being the first. So I've always, you know, surrounded myself with very diverse cultures and faiths and people. So I've never had like just one group of friends that like, are from the same culture or the same faith. I've tried not to have an echo chamber
Mhm.
because I find it really boring. And I feel like that there was real hope when social media came out, Facebook and everything else in the whenever it was, in the early 2000s, there was real hope. And then the
Yeah.
Arab Spring happened and, like globalization and everybody kind of like felt like there's this real optimism. But I'm feeling now in the 21st century that 2025 that optimism is now turning into a dread,
Mhm.
and it's like, power and technology are going together,
Mhm.
and it's kind of like a one vision. Whereas, yeah, I believe that, there's this connection to the one, but diversity and diversity of opinion and diversity of thought and diversity of living is what humanity is.
Yes.
If it makes any sense, right? So there's the one, there's, source, God, whatever you want to call that higher self, but that there's richness. If you look at it visually, I think the pink kind of symbolizes it. It's not just pink. There's gray. There's black. There's red. There's blue. Look at nature and you'll see the vibrancy of all the different colors, shades, hues, tones.
Yes.
And that is what I feel like some of us, not all of us, some of us are missing.
Yes. Yes, and what resonates with me as far as all of the diversity and the colors as well too. I described it in this way too. It's being able to play the piano with all of the chords and all of the notes, and not just one note over and over and over again. And it's the same thing with the feelings as well too. As I've been going deeper in my awareness and in my journey about cultural tribalism, why we band together in groups and why there's competitiveness in the groups. And as I'm understanding and coming more into awareness of patriarchy, if you want to call it that, white supremacy culture, if you want to, think of it as that. There's these values. There's these values that really kind of come up where diversity is kind of shut out. There's these values that say there's one right way and there's a lot of wrong ways. And that's the kind of thinking that we really want to be able to challenge, to bring in the diversity. And one of the other values of patriarchal or white supremacy culture is also the avoidance of conflict. And there's like a right or a privilege to comfort. And that's the thing where I find where I'm kind of bumping up against the system or the structures is that I really had to be honest with myself. I kind of I'm getting comfortable in conflict. I'm kind of I'm starting to kind of enjoy. I'm starting to enjoy the realness of it, the truth that's starting to come out. Because I think there's I think it's a beautiful time to be alive. And I which is kind of weird to say that because we are talking about there's the perception. A lot of the perception is dread. And there is a natural law called the law of polarity, where everything in creation, everything that has an expression has an equal and opposite. So where there is this feeling of connectedness and this feeling of wholeness, there's also going to be this feeling of separateness, of smallness, of inadequacy. And I'm I'm kind of in a way I'm getting excited about exploring that. I just really hope and just wish it would be easier to create containers where it's safer, where it feels safer to be able to talk about it.
I've been very blessed with having lots of friends
Yeah.
from different faiths and being able to converse with them in what is a very, it's difficult, but it's been made into a very safe way of like agreeing to disagree respectfully.
Yes.
And that's an art. That's an art. And it's
Oh yeah.
and it needs wisdom and it needs experience. And I've been very blessed to have found what's called an interfaith community, which was made by some of the greats like Lionel Blue, Rabbi Lionel Blue, and others, um, back in the 60s. And we meet every year in Germany. And so, you know, I think, Muslims, Jews, Christians, Buddhists, you know, people that are very versed in tradition. Here, I'm not talking about New Age spirituality, which I feel isn't really grounded in a
Right.
tradition. I'm
Right.
talking about like, and I'm not even talking about organized religion here. I'm talking about spiritual traditions.
Mhm.
And there is this there is still amongst certain like circles, and I think that circle is really important. I'm a very visual person, that you have that ability to debate, to argue, to converse by everybody has an opinion. That opinion doesn't necessarily mean it's a fact, it's an opinion. And there is that mutual respect in that circle, that each has a chair, a seat at that table. And I think what happens is, whether you want to talk about patriarchy or white supremacy, I kind of more believe in this majority and minority kind of dynamic. Sometimes the majority kind of tend to put down the minority.
Yes.
Um, and that's kind of been happening since time and time and time and time again. Um, and what I feel like, and it was really interesting, I was watching this documentary. I watch quite a lot of documentaries, but it was about Stonehenge,
Mm.
and why was these like stones gathered, and where did they come from? And some of it was really scientific and archaeological, and some of them came as far away from Wales and Orkney in Scotland. But there was this something about, like, there's similar kind of structures in other parts of the Great Britain, the Isles, where something similar is found, maybe not of stone, maybe made of wood and everything. And it was something about, like, each tribe, they were very different, but they each had a place in that circle.
Mm.
And the Stonehenge was kind of like built just before the Bronze Age, before the those people kind of invaded the British Isles. So it was kind of like at the peak of that society, but they kind of like knew that that age was coming to an end. That was kind of one of the conclusions of the documentary. And I kind of felt like, my God, wow. In one way, you kind of, there's like, there's like peaks to civilizations, and then just before the peak, or sorry, the demise, there's the peak. And what I was saying to somebody that I've worked with for over like 20 years, and he's Christian, and I was basically saying what's really interesting in over time, although we've had so many like millennia, some ways like the empires that were competing against each other are still the same empires. They might have changed in names, but they're still similar. Like, so
Yes.
there's the Chinese Empire, there's the Persian Empire, there's the Roman Empire, there's the like, but they're still competing against each other. Like Russian Empire, and
Yep.
it's the same empires, although their names might have changed, and they might be like, masking behind nationality. Those, they're still competing against each other. So really, have we really moved on? Because
Mm.
it's the fight to do with um, not just natural resources and like territories, but also um, hearts and minds.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and whether we call it the Mughal Empire, we call it India, or we call it that and for me, it kind of, again, it goes beyond skin color and faith, and it's is it that you know and we all know, because it kind of is those truth stories from all the religious texts. And here I'm going beyond the Bible and the Quran, that when you go into mythology, it's the same thing about, they say power, corrupts.
Mhm.
Absolutely, and absolute power,
Yes,
corrupts.
absolutely. Yeah. Mhm.
And yet, there's also that other side of us that, you can have all the money in the world, and then the next thing you want is all the power in the world. But
Yes.
really, all humans, what they really, really want, because we're social beings, we want just somebody else to understand us and to love us.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that for me is, like you said, we're living in this time of dread, but there is also a time of beauty, and a time of where we can, really, and it doesn't actually take a lot of money. Sometimes what it takes is a group of people to come together and share their resources, not just financial, but spiritual and intellectual. And that when that happens, that that chemistry, that that energy is, you know, I can't put words to it. There's just something magical. But unfortunately, that bid for power is when that magic kind becomes, you know, other energies come in, if that makes any
Yeah,
sense.
absolutely, absolutely. And tying that into the theme of love, and tying that into the theme of that kind of agape universal love as well. As you're talking about, you know, all of these empires or all of these initiatives for power, in all of the studies that I've come across, usually at the center of that kind of a drive is somebody who did not receive enough love. So, you know, we want to talk about a dictator or a tyrant or you know, a leader, you know, an oligarch. You know, usually it is something that is unresolved, whether it's whether it's an unrequited love of a partner or you know, not meeting the expectations of a parent or that kind of a thing. There's, you know, there's, like you said, there's this need for love, or you know, there's this, you know, human, very human expression, this human desire, this human longing for that connection. So that's just as you were describing all of this, what emerged for me was at the center of that storm, or I'll call it a storm, is usually somebody who who is who has not received the love or did not or had an expectation of being loved in a certain way. And when that feeling of inadequacy, you know, goes unresolved or unloved or unseen, you know, the expression is to express it in the outward world in the form of power, in the form of aggression, in the form of competition. So anyway, thank you. I just that was just what was very much emergent for me as you were describing.
And unfortunately, it's like, you know, you know, time always tells us, and if you study history, herstory, you know, it's those same themes. Like, you know, there's within us, we have the Pharaoh and we have Moses, right?
Right.
And that, and we have Aaron, and you know, that theme is a constant theme. And you know, sometimes when you know, you read the Bible and you read the Quran, that Pharaoh just looks like, you know, that little 2 year old having a
Yes.
tantrum.
Yes.
For those of us that have, you know, my children are, you know, my three sons are very, you know, old. They're 17, 23, and 28. But I do remember all of them having that tantrum, and you know, you know, it's having to, you know, be able to tolerate that tantrum, but give the space to the tantrum rather than
Mm,
shaming and blaming. But unfortunately, we're living, you know, in this age of technology, and I love technology. I'm not anti technology.
mhm,
What I'm anti is technology that is, you know, taking away the human. And although, you know, AI, you know, can replace lots and lots and lots and lots of things, people still crave for that connection to the human soul. They will always crave that. And it's the connection to within us, to life, to the divine, you know, however you want to understand it spiritually. But that human soul is beyond time, it's beyond space. And yes, we have these physical bodies, but we are beyond time, we are beyond space. And some things cannot be understood by the human mind, no matter how much the human mind tries to understand those things, those experiences.
mhm. So, Tanya, can you describe for me, or we'll explore a little bit here, your relationship, you know, as someone who, you know, who is in business as well and doing some great humanitarian work as well too. Can you describe a little bit about your relationship to this technological environment. The word techno-fascism came up as well too. So I'd like to, yeah, I'd really like to, yeah, I would really like to understand your experience, with
So, so my business is I was calling it an online business, but actually I'm gonna, I'm transitioning into more of a hybrid. So some of
that.
it's online, some of it is offline.
Mhm.
And I do believe that it needs to be both because um, there is a lot of denial for some that are in the online space that, there's less burnout and, but we all know the statistics that a lot of people that are starting online businesses here. I'm not just talking about coaches, I'm talking about the whole online business. Kind of world, whatever that is, there is, and unfortunately, burnout is democratic. It's not just in the business world; it's in every single industry. But it's
Absolutely.
something that is not talked about. It's talked about a bit in my industry as a social worker, where, I remember back in the late '80s, we talked about burnout then. It's talked about in the therapy world, but in the business world, there's a lot of denial for it. It's talked about, but in very tokenistic and superficial terms. And yet, I have met so many people that are like making lots and lots of money, but they're so damn unhappy.
Mhm.
And we also need a connection to not just our machines and our laptops and, and each other like on Zoom and everything else. We need to have connection with, other people in, in person kind of settings because we then re-energize ourselves. And I I have learned that, at the end of the day, I know this might sound really cliche, but you make money out and you can make money, and it's quite easy to make money if you know how to nurture relationships because yes, you can make money out of money if you want to, but the real richness comes from relationships. And when people that are chasing money, like you chase anything, you chase love, you chase money, you chase power, it eludes you. There's something paradoxical. But when you stop chasing, that's when it lands in your lap. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely, it does. Yes, yes.
And
And
unfortunately,
mhm,
and unfortunately, and this isn't just kind of just Facebook or just LinkedIn. It's the nature of technology and actually even how the smartphone has been actually made. And I don't think it was intentionally made like this, but
mhm,
it's very addictive. It's kind of like, one of those the slot machines and you're
mhm,
scrolling down and and it just triggers up all our flight, fight, freeze, float, responses
yeah,
because and lots of people don't actually know that. And you know while I have like met some really brilliant people, it's I know that for my own sanity, I need to take time off online. And this just doesn't apply to people that have online businesses. I think even if you're an employee or you're retired or if you're a child at school, you know, the smartphone is so damn addictive.
mhm,
It's like and for me, it's I look around and I kind of like think like that image of like the world is on fire outside and yet people are on their phones. um it's this real image of dread. And
mhm,
sometimes I observe people when I'm like traveling on buses and trains, and I'm just as guilty. Sometimes I am on my phone, but sometimes I consciously put my phone away.
mhm.
And I just observe people and they're in their own worlds. And yes, sometimes you need a device for a long distance, but it means that you're not like connected to yourself and your environment and to others in that environment. And I'm just wondering what is happening to our brains? How are our brains being reconfigured, rewired. I mean, I come from a generation that has seen a lot of technological advances in a very short time.
Hmm.
And, I kind of like my children have also seen that. So I kind of really worry, I suppose, for the next generation, the babies, that were born in the last 10 years that are just so used to these devices. Um, and yet, I know there's lots of studies about digital detoxification and digital minimalism, and luckily, there are lots of voices that are um, expressing these thoughts and kind of sharing the research. But I also think that there is, because we're also very so reliant on our phones now. It's very difficult, and I try to practice what I preach. It's very difficult to be offline when you are now so dependent on this smartphone, which is a mini computer at the end of the day.
It is completely. And going back to something you said about whether or not it's intentional or not, there are definitely those who believe that it is very intentional and very deliberate. There's films out there like The Social Dilemma, The Great Hack,
Mm,
where
mm,
where the programmers are kind of explaining that oh yeah, we did kind of do this and we did this, and it's kind of like the Frankenstein's monster that it's hard to to kind of reel it back in. But yeah, the neuroscience behind it as well too is very sophisticated and advanced. And I agree, and I am very empathetic as well too for the generation coming up, and the generation currently. The brain development, it's difficult for the brain to develop to be able to have the social skills, to be able to be in curiosity and appreciation, when when the brain is working in such a way where it's just paying attention to the hits, those dopamine hits, where it's kind of like, oh, okay, we've got that, there's that temporary sense of satisfaction, but it's not sustainable because all of a sudden you're not communicating anymore. You're not expressing your needs. You're not expressing your boundaries. There's studies as well too about how when somebody things come easy for somebody, like in the technological world, things happen at the touch of a keyboard, or when there is a lot of money. Going back to that point you made about how people make a lot of money but they're not always very happy. There's some studies have been shown that the part of the brain that shuts down, that monitors empathy, that monitors connection, that's what these devices are actually doing, is shutting down the brain's capacity to sense the energy of connection and of feeling. So that's why it can be used as a tool. It can be used it's kind of like nuclear energy. Nuclear energy can light up a city for years and years and years, or it can destroy it. We'll see
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
how it's applied. Yeah.
And and there, excuse me. And that's where I kind of think that I have, in my entrepreneurial journey, I have been very, in some ways, blessed and cursed, because blessings are curses and curses are blessings. That
Yeah.
I have been building my business whilst being a social worker. So some people actually say, and I talk to other entrepreneurs, and they actually say, some people aren't living in the real world, and
Hmm.
and it takes, Rome wasn't built in a day, you know but there are all these like myths that I can, you can build a business, a six-figure business in 30 days, and all these myths. And it's not true, because to build, it was something actually, I think Madonna was actually saying, that she was talking about those people that become like instantly famous, they go viral, but they never worked for it. They never, to be famous, in the old days, people had to work for it, you know, um, and there is something like, it's become like, if you talk about the hustle and the grind, there's something shameful about it. But
Yeah.
I come from a generation that it's, you're proud to to be working hard. There's nothing wrong with working hard. Yes, it helps to work smart, but you won't know how to work smart unless you've worked hard. You won't
Exactly.
know the difference. And unfortunately, we're getting like people in their 20s that are all into like working smart. And, the young adults of today, I can see that they're, what, whilst, I don't think there was that many choices, there were some choices, but now there's like so many different choices. And
Yeah,
I'm
it's
not
overwhelming.
anti-choice. I'm not anti-choice, please don't misunderstand me. But it's like people are like flooded with choices and opportunities. And then that's when the brain shuts down because, and especially, you've got like, notifications buzzing, you're being put in this direction and that direction and that direction. And I'm sure people in the old days felt as flooded, and it was difficult then. Each generation, you have your own, challenges. But I think we're living in a time that is so fast paced that that's one of my, my very clear message. Slow down. And I'm saying that not to preach, like not to kind of be like, I've slowed down. I think it's a message for me and you and everybody, because even in I don't know, maybe there are some remote villages somewhere, um like, even the places that are really slow, like I visited New Zealand earlier on in January for a couple of weeks, and it's more slow paced. Australia's a little bit more slow paced, but they still have access to technology that I'm not saying that they shouldn't have access, but I can feel that even those places, they're becoming more faster in their pace. And it's like, like there needs to be a respect that everybody has their own pace, and let's respect each other's pace. Not everybody has to kind of speed along. It's, we're all different.
Yeah, what is becoming apparent to me as well too is like because there is this overwhelming plethora of choices out there. One of the things about just understanding the difference between competitive environments and collaborative environments, when you're when you're in a state of overwhelm and there's so many options, you get paralyzed, and that kind of puts us back into the back left quadrant of the brain where it's about safety. And in the conversations that I've had, especially when people are under a lot of stress, overwhelmed by the options, overwhelmed by the choices. I sometimes just ask a simple question. I ask them, well, what do you want? What is it that would give you the most pleasure? What is it? What is your highest outcome here? And oftentimes there's no answer. And the answer I often get is, I just want to be safe. I just want to survive.
And that's kind of, you kind of like talks, you asked me the question about the business world, where I feel like for me, because social work is very political.
Yeah.
And in the business world, there is this myth again, like you can't talk about politics,
Yes.
and it's not true.
Yes.
Luckily, I've met lots of people that are entrepreneurs who are of the left wing persuasion, who
Hmm.
believe in ethical marketing and ethical business, and sharing the profits, and fairness, and that kind of business model does exist, and you have entrepreneurs with that political mindset. Yet
Hmm.
there is this myth that all entrepreneurs are like, you know you get those masks that, those ones that like it's all about serving, but no, it's
Yeah.
not all about serving. They're actually about something totally else. And then you've got the ones that, that's a really selfish entrepreneur, but they're in survival mode, because if they don't bring in the revenue, they won't pay their rent and they won't be able to have food on the table. So there's, like this, at the end of the day, the internet, right, is a sea of opinions. Some of them are based on fact and evidence, and some of those opinions aren't. And it's having that discernment of what is fact and what is opinion, which, and what is truth. And there are many truths, not just one truth. And this took me a time to figure that out. It took me a while to figure out. And unfortunately, you don't get that discernment straight away. Especially when you start a business and you're building a business, it takes a massive amount of mistakes that, because it seems like you're like navigating this, like you're in this space, which is a very public space. And one person comes along and tells you da 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 da, and another person comes along and tells you da 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 da. And because it's a very 2D experience, it's not a 3D or a 4D or a 5D or a 6D or a 7D experience, you are having to rely on your mind, yeah, not the rest of you. And you end up making most people make, not all, most people end up kind of unfortunately getting into a lot of debt. But they started out with that really heart full of gold and service. And yet, they're some of them are kind of lured into this, lured in this very, they've got to like unveil all the myths, and
Yes,
the lies.
exactly.
And
Yes. And
and
that,
and and either if they're not surrounded by what I would say entrepreneurs that are like really grounded and live in the real world and have that experience, you get caught up in fantasy.
mhm,
Does that make, like that has been my experience. And, I luckily, fortunately, thank God, I have been blessed to kind of live in the real world, not just the online world. And I'm not saying that those that just live in the online world are living in a fantasy. Of course not. But I think those ones that are very successful entrepreneurs and also very heart-centered have had those experiences that they live in the real world and they
mhm.
choose to.
Yes. Yes, and part of the blessing and the curse about living in that real world and really, really investigating that, what comes up often is well, how intentional is it that there is this extractive nature that puts people into debt, and putting them in those fantasy worlds. So that's the thing where you know people. People go down that rabbit hole, and then it does become kind of like this heated exchange, or this debate about who's right or who's wrong, or who's intentionally doing this. And that's where there's I think there's a great opportunity for deeper conversation around that, because there are a lot of blind spots. And
Mm.
yeah, there's a lot of blind spots. And when we start to kind of point direction into that blind spot, that's where the real personal growth and the real spiritual growth and the real awareness starts to come in. And the moment it becomes competitive is the moment where it becomes extractive, where it feels like you're in these positions where you have to prove yourself or prove your value, or make a convincing, convince people. And this is all real world stuff. um, and then it comes back to, oh, okay, if we really look at this, if we really look at how this system is set up, how intentional is it? And
Mm.
that conversation brings up a whole other can of worms as well too. Is that those who are regulating these extractive systems, are they open to doing the shadow work, the deeper shadow work, to understand how that was set into place and how it really is hurting, really is hurting a lot of people. And not to place blame, and not to go into victim mode and place the blame, but how to really take accountability for, oh, okay, I'm starting to see now how how the system was created in a way that that is blurring the line between privacy which is to protect somebody, to protect their own interests and to protect their own, protect their own life and livelihood. And where does that line blur between privacy and secrecy, where there is an intentional initiative to hurt people or to keep people down or to keep people blind and keep people, in the dark. So yeah, that's what that's where I often find myself, in a lot of ways where I ask these questions and I bring these things up and yeah, I mean it kind of like it's like a finger pointing to the blind spot, and that's where you really start to see, ooh, okay, how much work
I'm
to be
really
able
glad that you said that, because as you were talking, I just kept thinking, for those that kind of built the smartphone, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think it was built in Silicon Valley. And in Silicon Valley, uh, there was a very influential thinker that a lot of people that live in Silicon Valley or kind of, they became big in Silicon Valley. There's a thinker called Ayn Rand, Ayn Rand, who wrote quite a few books. But her books and her, and I need to read one of them, but her books are very individualistic, and it's all about the I. And I just wonder, and I might be wrong, how many of those that are in Silicon Valley um, do do know of Jung and do know of the archetypes and have actually done the shadow work and the shadow alchemy. And because, you know, kind of going back to like my original point about being a social worker, you're constantly having to deal with the shadows. You're constantly, because social workers are agents of control, but they're also agents of change. So because some of us work for like governments and local government, we have that hat of authority, and we have also political authority. So we are agents of control. So we're constantly battling with those different roles that we have. And you come up with resistance. And unfortunately, I feel like within the online world, there are some of us that have done that shadow alchemy, done that shadow work, but then there are some that, because it feels like this like free for all, that anyone can become a coach because it's unregulated. The online space is unregulated, so anybody can make whatever, and kind of say that they're a coach. There's no checks and balances. I come from a very highly regulated industry, which is social work. And I'm having to live in two worlds, whereas very unregulated and very regulated.
yes. Mhm.
And I think for now, and I'm also a very pragmatic person, I think the solution really is pragmatic, is about self-regulation. And there are luckily a lot of voices, and I'm all, when I first came into this online space, that there were three things that I kind of learned. It was the three C's, and one of them was consistency. And I think in some ways I have been consistent, but maybe in my messaging I haven't been consistent. And then one of them was commitment to your business, commitment to yourself. Obviously, if it's a mission based business, which it is, mine is to, eliminate burnout, beat burnout. Um, and the other C, because it really kind of like, for me, it was like key, was collaboration. And I've always tried to collaborate, and I still collaborate because that's where the money is made, via collaborations. Because at the end of the day, money is just, I know people say this and it's very new age, but it's not, it's true. Money is just energy. It just circulates. You hold on to it, it will it will do its best to circulate. You can hold on for it for a while, but money, it's like air. It's like anything. It's like love. Give and take. You give and take, and you give and take. And there's only so much money, unfortunately. No, fortunately, we actually need. There's only so much you need as a human being, as a human family.
Absolutely.
But unfortunately, there is this myth that you've got to make six figures, seven figures, eight figures. Do you really? Do you really?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, what comes up for me on that too is when money or the energy of money is allowed to pull and stagnate, that's when it becomes corroded or corrupted, and that's when the flow stops. Um, yeah, so it's kind of like you had mentioned being in a very heavily regulated environment, and also one that's not very regulated, and it is kind of in a lot of ways a free for all. What we look at in in my in my environment is how that flow of energy and money kind of gets pulled and stagnated in that regulation area. And what emerges is stewards, people who are stewards, where they're looking at the regulation and they're starting to point at what do we really need to protect? What is most important here? And how much of it is just not essential for sustainability. So so
It's also not essential for
mhm,
humanity. Like I've just returned from New Zealand,
mhm,
which is rich. It's rich in, natural resources. I think it produces a lot of milk and dairy,
mhm,
and it produces a lot of beef, right? And yet, majority of what they produce is exported. And so what they have for their own inhabitants, yeah, and here I'm not talking about, all of their New Zealand population. The cost of living for grapes, and they have lots of New Zealand, wine is very, like they've got vineyards. The cost of grapes, right? It was phenomenal. I was just really shocked. Like a bunch, like a box of grapes was like seven, yeah, would have been, yeah, £7. Whereas
mhm,
here, a box of grapes is like £3, three, £4.
yeah,
New Zealand butter is cheaper here than it is there.
yeah,
And a lot of people were just saying, well, that's just pure capitalism. Even the government can't intervene because it's just, like, China. I'm not blaming China here. It's just this is the capitalistic economics. The majority of the
mhm,
milk is transported to China in powder form,
mhm,
for to to make baby formula. And I'm like thinking, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. Yet, you know, there is only so much money that you need. At the end of the day, what you need,
yeah,
yes, I'm not saying you don't need money. Of course, everybody needs, money. Money, we live in a financial economy that you need money. We need money to survive. Some of us need to save. Some of us it's about serving. Some of us it's all three. Um, but when it becomes this, like you talk about it quite a lot, it becomes this scarcity model, scarcity mindset. Really, what I've come, and this is from my work on the ground, the gold and the financial gold and the abundance is those conversations, going back to what you were saying in the beginning, those conversations between people, the relationships between people getting together. And here, I might be talking about something very left wing, but I don't think it is left wing. I just think it's pure economic sense that you have that, like these, micro economies where you have people talking to each other and sharing resources,
yeah,
financial, intellectual, physical, community, space, on all kinds of levels, resources. And unfortunately, those spaces and that facilitation is becoming less and less. A lot of it is now based on goodwill, and
yeah,
goodwill can only last a certain amount of time.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And what's alive for me in response to that as well too is that in competitive environments, it almost seems like the human being is devalued. But in those facilitated spaces where goodwill is a value, is a prioritized value, value is abundant. I mean, if you're in a collaborative space and you're looking for the gold in another person, you're going to find it in abundance. But if you're looking at the other person as a competitor or someone who is you know trying to get their piece of a scarcity resourced pie,
Mm.
it's very easy to fall into the trap of devaluing the person. So, but yeah, absolutely. I really resonate with that because, yeah, if you're looking for the value in the other person, in their intellect or in their skills, you will find it. My son's yes.
And, unfortunately, I'm a very pragmatic person. Unfortunately, then, kind of it comes back to this, left wing, right wing, kind of politics, economics, and really a lot of it, is it really left wing, right wing, or is it just pure common sense? Because those cooperatives, that collaboration has been happening even before these terms came about. Left wing, right wing, it's been happening since time immemorial. Obviously, in some ways, maybe it's a little bit more complicated now because we live in a more complicated world. But
Mhm.
sometimes what I find nowadays is people make something very complicated very simple. And
Yeah,
then sometimes we make something very simple complicated.
that's the duality. Yes, that's the paradox about that. Yeah, and the thing is, when you look past the labels, when you look past the labels of right wing, left wing, or whatnot, what it really is, it's just this balance between structure and freedom, structure and freedom. How much structure is needed, to make something sustainable, but how much structure is too much structure, so in that it starts to feel oppressive. So it's that balance. So it's I mean, if we're going to take the stereotypical conservative viewpoint, it almost seems like that there's too much, there's too much restriction. If you want to take the stereotypical liberal viewpoint or liberal values, there's a lot of freedom, but at what point does too much freedom start to feel disorienting? And that's what that's what I kind of entertain in my world, in this dualistic, this dance. I'd like to reframe the language rather than being a conflict or a battle or a war. How do we make it a dance between, how much structure and freedom is needed?
And that's what my book is
Yes.
called Dancing with Darkness, and that is kind of just really um synchronistic that you've kind of ended it. That's what my book is called, Dancing with Darkness, and it's really for healers, for practitioners, for professionals, for creatives that have been able to navigate others, whoever those others are, clients, patients, family, friends, to find their light, but they've been struggling with their own darkness. They've been dancing, by themselves in darkness or with darkness. And, it is about like facing some of those shadows, which is not easy. It's not easy to face the shadows within or shadows around you. It's not. I'm never going to say it's easy. It's one of the most scariest things to do because you don't want to see that side of you or those parts of you
Right.
that you're avoiding or you're denying or you're rejecting because within us, as human beings, we have the good and the bad and the ugly. And, no matter how much we want to kind of just embrace the good, we do have the bad and the ugly and all the shades and colors and, tones and tunes and, notes
Mhm.
and chords
Yep.
and everything in between.
Well, look at that. We're almost at an hour here, Tanya. So what I usually do to close out these conversations is I do two checkout questions. The first checkout question is, what did you appreciate most about our conversation today?
I appreciated the way we were able to reflect, yeah, um, from each other and with each other, and and just the organic nature of the conversation, because I feel like because we're living in a very technologically assisted world, and I'm not against it, that organic connection for me is, and that organic conversation is where you get the depth and the breadth and the love.
Very good. And the second checkout question is, if we were to continue this conversation or have another conversation, what would you be most curious about exploring next?
I would love to be exploring. There's polarity,
Mhm.
but what brings us together? There's, there's the opposites, but there's, also that dance. So what helps us dance? What helps us, dance with the shadows and the light and the darkness?
Very good. Very good. Well, that could be another conversation. So thank you, Tanya. So to wrap this up, this has been a Living Library conversation with Taniya Hussain. So Tanya, how do we reach out to you? So someone might be watching this, and if they want to connect with you, how would you like them to reach out to you, or how would you like them to make that connection?
So I am on Facebook, but as Taniya Hussain, the Muslim Alchemist in brackets. But I also have a website called taniyahussain.com, TaniyaHussain.com. That's one way you can reach out. I'm also on Facebook, known as the Reflective Space, and I have a small Telegram community. I'm also on Telegram.
Great, thank
Those are
you. Thank you very much. So, yep, just a reminder, anyone watching this as well, too, if you are a member of the Karmic Margin Call Project Time Bank, and if you're interested in becoming a Time Bank member, please just reach out to me. I can send you the application. But all of the material that you watch on the Living Library or any of the Road Counselor material, you can claim as hours that you are serving. So you can exchange those hours, for people in network. Just having a living library conversation like this helps to build relationships, so that you can work up to maybe exchanging services. So again, to log this in, make sure that you mention that this is an hour that you are serving, that you are providing, and the category is workshops, presentations, and classes. So Tanya, thank you very much for joining us, and I'll have this up here very soon.